Great. Welcome to the Northampton Policing Review Commission full commission meeting on March 9th, 2021. This meeting is remote on Zoom and it is being recorded. And so our first order of business is to take a roll call.
Okay. Booker.
Here.
Dan.
Here.
Nick.
Here.
David.
Here.
Alex.
Here.
Javier.
Here.
Namdi.
Here.
Michael.
Here.
Josie.
Here.
Cynthia.
Here.
Carol.
Here.
Chris. Not here. And Elizabeth is not here. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next order of business on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes. On the table are the meeting minutes from January 5th, January 19th, February 11th, February 23rd, and March 2nd. We can have a motion to approve all of them collectively, or if somebody wants to have a comment about anyone in particular, we can do that as well. Booker, and you're muted. Yeah, thank you.
Actually, I decided to pause because I was going to move that we accept all of those minutes. But I'm also willing to pause if someone wants to comment.
So there's a motion to accept all the minutes, unless, is there any discussion on that? Or do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Alex. And I always forget, do we have to vote on this, Noah? Yeah, okay, Alex.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're voting on is to accept those 5 sets of minutes as stated previously.
Awesome.
Thank you, Noah.
Booker.
Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
Nick.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Alex.
Yes.
Javier.
Yes.
Namdi.
Yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Josie.
Yes.
Cynthia.
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
and Chris and Elizabeth aren't here, so they are passed. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Noah. Next item on the agenda is public comment. We will hold public comment for 15 minutes. We're welcome any comment or anyone to comment from the public who's here this evening. Once again, we will allow 3 minutes for that comment, and commissioners cannot respond if you're going to pose a question. So if you could raise hands in the reactions feature, I'm happy to call on anyone who would like to make a public comment at this time. Again, we're in the public comment section. Just want to see if anyone wants to make a public comment. And we do have an individual, and that's Robert. Robert?
Hey everyone, I'm Robert. I live in Northampton, Ward 3. And I just wanted to comment on a few things that I heard at the policies meeting last night. And not to necessarily pick on that committee, as they feel like maybe I have been, but I heard some good things too, actually. For example, David Hoos pointing out that that this report really is not specifically about Northampton Police, it's about policing and the system of policing. And I hope you all keep that in mind tonight as you discuss the report. But then I also wanted to talk about some of the reforms that were discussed. There was something at the very end of the meeting that was really concerning to me, which was that someone from the community had proposed an expansion of the Northampton Police Department's mission, which it was read and put into the document very quickly, but I feel like some of the points that this community member made are like they should be addressing fear, police should be addressing fear that community members have of crimes. And everything that I read about heard about changing the mission of the department, I feel like just expands its reach and does the opposite of reducing the footprint. And so I'd also just like to say I'm not necessarily opposed to reforms. I'm opposed to reformist reforms that have failed for decades, for over 100 years. Some of these include things like community policing and more training. But I thought I would just list off a few ideas for abolitionist reforms that I read from Critical Resistance. One of them is to suspend the use of paid administrative leave for cops under investigation, withhold pensions and don't rehire cops involved in excessive force, cap overtime and accrual and overtime pay for military exercises, withdraw participation in police militarization programs, and reduce the size of the police force. And I think the thing that all of these have in common is that it's asking if it reduces the footprint of policing, if it reduces the funding of policing, and if it increases the material conditions of those most harmed by police. And so I just want you to keep that in mind as you're discussing recommendations tonight, and to ask yourself those questions as you're revising your drafts. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Anyone else who's listening? Anyone else present tonight?
Sorry, could I add one more really quick thing?
Robert, you only have 10 seconds left.
Okay, I just wanted to know if the committee has considered repealing laws that criminalize behavior in mental health as potential recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Next person up is Yaping.
Hello. First of all, thank you all again. And I do happen to second everything Robert just shared. I wasn't able to attend the meeting last night, so I'm not sure of the specifics, but I think the commission has all been looking at this critical resistance chart that has, but I want to reiterate what a good chart I think it is. It has a lot of green and red squares in it and different criteria. And again, critical resistance, I think, is a really good source because they have organizers who have been doing this work for over 2 decades and who also come to the organizing from a place of wanting to repair the harm in their own communities. I now completely forgot the other thing I was going to mention. But I think, yeah, I'm trying to shoot, there was something else I was going to say and I completely forgot it. But I think that chart's really great. And if I think of the other thing, I will email it. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, Yaping. Sorry, your memory took a turn there. Let's see, looking for other comments. Other comments, once again, 3 minutes, and we cannot respond. And give folks a chance. I'm seeing none. And so I'm going to close public comment at this time.
Cynthia, would I be able to, I just remembered, is it?
Okay, so you have a minute, Yaping. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. It's related to the chart and thinking about reforms and the difference between reformist reforms, as some organizers put it, and reforms that get us closer to the community we want to live in. I wanted to bring up the analogy that I think has been made in the past about looking at, for instance, a fossil fuel corporation and just thinking about how we would want to go about pushing for a more sustainable community in terms of climate justice, and that we probably wouldn't want to try to push a fossil fuel corporation to adopt better practices when we could instead just invest in other energy alternatives and other modes of building a society and using energy. So for me, there's a really clear analogy between policing and looking at climate justice. That was all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yaping. Once again, I am going to close public comment at this time. I don't see anyone else that wants to speak. So public comment is closed and we'll proceed on with the agenda. We devoted 20 minutes if we need it. If anyone wants to provide any reactions, comments to our Saturday public hearing. Any thoughts? I think we're pretty quick to raise our hand generally, so just want to make sure.
I think Booker has a hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Booker.
Actually, so I'm going to ask, I actually have a comment because I also was present in the policies meeting last evening, and I wanted to bring up a discussion that it's actually about, they had a wonderful presentation by the person who's the director of the 911, the healthcare, the dispatch person, and I wanted to bring some of that discussion to this space, only though if that has room at this place.
I'm not sure if we can do that. Dan, how do you feel about that? Can we talk about, we're in a public hearing part of our agenda. I'm wondering if this could happen down in the report from the subcommittees.
That, or, I mean, depending on what the relevance is. We also, when we talk about the policy recommendations in that draft, one of the recommendations is about dispatch, and it was written, by the alternative. So that's a great place to sort of talk about that recommendation and what might need to be changed as well, or be added and things. So
yeah, thank you, Dan. And as I said to some of you, Dan and I spent a couple hours there today in Dispatch Center. So hopefully we can add some more information. So great. Thank you, Booker. Thank you very much. I'm trying to stay with this public meeting open thing here to make sure we're in the right topic. So anything on public hearing, on Saturday's public hearing? Okay, I think if it's okay with everyone, we can move on. We're going to move on to the next item, which is the final report, draft, etc. Dan is going to walk us through that. I'm going to try to facilitate so that he can edit while we're on the screen, but just a couple reminders. We are developing these appendix sections, and please, if you have spoken to anyone in the context of this commission, or if anyone has come to your subcommittees, can you send the name of that individual and the organization they're representing, please, to Dan or I, so that we can develop this compendium of people that we've consulted. And we're going to really need that by this weekend so that we can get this into the report. So I'm going to just put the date of Saturday on there. We really want to illustrate in the report that we have talked with a lot of individuals. So I'm sure we can plow through the minutes, but it's a lot easier for you to give us that information, and also if you've talked to someone that's outside of the minutes. So we would appreciate that. The other thing I wanted to remind people of is that we talked about having a section in appendix about personal reflections. So if any of you wanted to partake in that, to have a personal reflection on the how the commission experience was for you, if you could get that to us by Saturday as well, that would be great. And I also wanted to respond to some feedback that we wanted to acknowledge those individuals that left our commission. And so I have reached out to every one of them And so we're coming up with a process, a procedure to acknowledge that. Some individuals want it a certain way, some don't. And so I think just in respect to what individuals' different needs are, but I wanted to let you know that we didn't forget about that. So Dan, do you want to, I'll try to see how hands are raised when they're raised and walk us through what we've done, what you've done, what subcommittees have done, and Dan has pulled this together. Okay.
So everyone should have gotten a link to this earlier this afternoon, and I realize the policies and services that that subcommittee has been doing a huge amount of editing on their work already. So what I have here might not reflect the most recent. So it'll be good to talk about those two. So please correct me. But basically, all I did was sort of structure just the recommendations parts. So just the things that we say we either want to, things that need to change or be created or things like that. So just that part. And then trying to structure them sort of in a way that makes sense, especially since the alternatives subcommittee was proposing phases of these. So trying to think of what would be phase one, what's phase two, when it's like, so again, so we'll go through all of this and sort of, I will do live editing. So as you all are talking, I'm not going to be saying a lot. I'm just going to be trying to make the edits that I'm hearing as we sort of flesh this out and then work to some consensus on it too. So can everybody see the page so far? Everybody's good. All right. Just the introduction to this section. So the commission can use a better word for that for our collective body, but we use the guiding principle of ensuring the right response to the right call is available for all people. To do this, we have attempted to reimagine public safety responses based on the needs of individual callers, including and outside the existing options for delivery and service. Currently available. This is redundant. I'm going to change that right now. We also highlight areas for improvement and existing structures and responses as well. The recommendations we propose can be used as a starting point to create further meaningful changes as the city evaluates the results of their implementation and additional opportunities. So I guess I'll start. Does that speak up, folks, when there's something that you like, don't like, want more, want less?
The quietest this group's ever been.
I know. All right, so not seeing anything, I'm just going to move on. And so this is where there are some things like, what's the name of this department? We just sort of had this new department. I don't think
Dan,
we have. Yeah.
Dan, I've lost it. Is it still being shared?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, just a moment. I don't know what happened here. Hold on. Oh, got it back. All right. And if you could just give it 1 minute to review what you wrote.
Yeah.
So Dan, we're looking at what alternatives submitted. There is a possibility this might get repeated. And so we might kind of change things a little bit so that we're not repeating. Is that right?
Yeah, so this document has basically both. It has it has any recommendation that anybody sent. So
yeah. Okay.
And I didn't really change any of them. I just tried to organize them in a sort of logical structure. So I'm going to cheat and just on the side, there's, what would be phase one, where like there's things that the policies group submitted, things that the alternatives submitted, and then phase two, where there's some more and sort of figuring out where these go. There's a whole bunch of things, and there's, some things that aren't necessarily recommendations that it'd be good to check in on in terms of where we want those as well.
Right. Carol?
So are we moving into the second paragraph now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. The title of the department seems a little cumbersome. We've talked alternately about Department of Community Safety or versus Department of Community Care. I'd just be happy if we could decide on one or the other.
Javier? You're muted, Javier.
So I was gonna point out the same thing. We debated long about the one of the things that we had fun in the community is that the definition of safety has been controversial and there is not a unified definition within the community in Northampton about what safety is, right? Because of it, I would prefer community care rather than safety.
I think Michael, if Javier, you were finished, Michael?
Javier is done.
I think so, yes.
Okay. I agree with community care, mostly because I do think in the structure of the city budget and structure of the city departments right now, you know, there's referral to the overall public safety, you know, which is multiple departments. It's, you know, police, obviously, fire, rescue, dispatch, even some of the building commissioners' duties fall under that as well. So I would second a community care name just to try to avoid any confusion.
Namdi?
Thank you. I no objections to you know, dropping safety and keeping community care. Moving on to the paragraph below, I'd like to see something that raises the issue of a need for 24-hour accountability. Now, I imagine not every single thing will require that, but I think it would be good to have that kind of front, that for some things that that we're trying to replace, consciously being aware that there would need to be like a 24-hour availability. So that's just something that refers to that. Again, recognizing it may not be every single thing, but that at least some things will need to be 24/7 if this is going to work.
David?
Yeah, I want to second what Namdi said, because I think what we hear all the time is as to why the police are the right people to call is, well, they're there. They're out there. They're there 24/7. So the only adequate response to that is the Department of Community Care is going to be a 24/7 operation.
Javier?
Yeah. The last two sentences of that paragraph, they should include regular input from the community with periodic open meetings and accessible office. It should be guided. So I find language a little too vague, even more because we were talking about. I think we should be more intentional about, you know, if they are going to have to hold X amount of community meetings per semester or per year, how is going to be the how the if there's going to have a board, or we talk about peer people with live experiences, and it's not there.
On this point, Booker or Dan, did you need to clarify anything from Javier? You good?
Yeah. So I don't want to step Booker. Are you going to say something about that?
Go ahead, Dan.
I just wanted, Javier, could you just say again, like what specific piece you wanted to add?
Hold on. Yeah, in just the last phrase, should be guided by those who use the service and those with past lived experience. I think that if we don't go at least in some specificity, that's way too broad, too general. I mean, one of the things that we talk is the lack of accountability of service providers within people getting the service, and people getting the service not being able to speak up because they were fearful of losing the service, right? So how do we manage that? Because at the end of the day, if it's not that I'm in favor of, but if this is going to house any kind of teams, plus is going to be interacting with service providers, I want to see those service providers being able to be accountable, and people being able to come to this department with any complaint or any issue without being fearful of losing the service. And if that's not embedded into it, I think that it's way too it's unclear.
If we want to, thank you, Javier. If we want to stay on this point, I know Booker, you had your hand raised first, then Nick, then Josie. Nick, are you going to talk on this point?
Yes.
Okay. Booker, are you okay with that?
That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Nick?
I'm not exactly understanding what you're referring to, Javier. I'm not sure how you're describing accountability and what you're meaning. I'm just not getting it. But I want to say, past lived experience, I just want to clarify, do we mean something in particular by that? Because are we talking about mental health, incarceration? Are we talking about being a person of color? I'm just not quite sure if that's clear what that is. And maybe leaving it general is okay, but I just not sure if everybody's talking about the same thing.
And I want to give, Javier, do you want to respond to that for clarity, or shall we move to Josie or Alex?
I can be brief. Well, what I mean is that when we're talking about it should be guided by those who use the service, and it should be guided by what that means. That could have a lot of different interpretations. I mean, I honestly would like to see a person of color guiding that department, and a person of color with professional credentials, hopefully with lived experience. If we don't say that, I bet we're going to end up with, systemically how things are set up, we're going to end up with a white male in charge of it. So I think that we need to be intentional in what we mean for guided, and how do we envision the confirmation of this, and how do we envision the accountability portion, which is how many times a year they are going to be reporting, who they are going to be reporting, how many community meetings are going to happen. That's going to be run by one person. It is going to be sort of if it's possible by city law, is that going to be advised by a group of people, or just is going to be somebody who is going to answer to the mayor?
Josie, did you want to speak to this point?
Yeah, I definitely want to back Javier up in that the phrase guided by seems a bit vague to me, because I want people to kind of keep in mind that, the purpose of looking at policing and policing in Northampton in general is kind of the acknowledgement of the unjust hierarchies that exist, right? We don't just want, input by people with lived experiences. We want them in leadership roles, right? We got to remember that in this department of community care, that we frame the community as front and center, and that it should be coming from a place of compassion and empathy and from mutual lived experience, right? And so I feel like guided by is almost too vague and undercuts the kind of the spirit of a department for community care. I would feel more comfortable with language that says maybe led by those with lived experiences with the proper credentials, right? Because we want people who have lived that life, who have been subjected to the kind of unjust hierarchies, to be able to care for communities who have experienced similar things. But maybe that's just me. That's my 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Josie. I'm sorry, Booker, I think you want to speak to this point now, and then we'll go to Alex.
So actually, I have a different recommendation here. I actually want to ask, could we, the reason I wanted to comment was about this department ultimately needs to be available to the community with 24/7 staffing to support responses. I would like that to be a yellowed thing, because I think we need to come back and talk about that. And I actually think I'm going to suggest that we yellow this comment that we're talking about now. I'm just going to let go that comment about people with lived experience or color, because they're likely to have experienced that and what that felt like to me when I heard that. I'm just going to let that fly by, but I'm just going to make it stated. And I think these are things we need to come back and talk about. And the reason I want to yellow the department needs to be available to the community 24/7. The hospitals I work in do not have crisis support available 24/7. We hold people until crisis support can come into the next day. So I don't want to limit who we think might be able to provide services. Quote, if a peer support program says we can't do 24/7, that doesn't mean that shouldn't be an important part of the support. And that's why I'm suggesting we yellow this and say, let's come back and talk about it. So we can keep moving through the rest of the document.
And maybe, Alex, were you going to speak to the point? There's a suggestion to yellow it, and I think just keeping in mind, I'm not sure when we'll have the opportunity to come back, so we have to think about how we want to edit it. But Alex, I think you were the author of this, no?
Right. Yeah. So I drafted a very rough draft, and this the issue of guiding. First, I just want to say, yeah, that what Josie added and what Javier added, I really think the specificity is helpful, and the question of its form within the existing city government is certainly a difficult one in terms of, we can't. Essentially, it would probably be an advisory board, and it might be good to specify, for example, like what percentage of folks we want that would be with past lived experience, and specify those lived experiences, just so there's more of a sense of what you might be looking for as that board is populated. But really, somehow, as I say earlier, this needs to be accountable to those it serves in a way that is not currently seen in city departments. So how do we get that point across and into the form? And I'm not sure about that, how to do that.
So we have and I see your hand, Carol. We have a recommendation to yellow this and come back. Dan, your thoughts on this? Should we yellow it and assign it to someone to redo, or how do you think we should proceed, just in the interest of time?
I think for now, we'll just leave it highlighted. Again, we're going to have, another meeting on Friday where we can sort of jump back into these things. And I think some of this is also going to be, what can we put in terms of concise language here that's still meaningful, but concise language here, and then expand upon, in another area or in an appendix to say, what are existing accountability models that we want to see, and explain them. I don't think that we're going to get too far by saying exactly what the accountability structure has to be, or what the structure has to be in terms of this department, without knowing sort of like what the city is going to do for it and what its composition is. If it starts out with a if we specify, X number of people, and it starts out as a department of 2, it's already struggling, to fulfill those requirements. So I think just outlining what the models are and why, we can do that in an appendix and keep this as the tighter language of just, and I think we still have to say, what does led by mean? What does guided by mean? And those sort of things, and wrestle with that. Does that make sense?
Yep. And Carol and Javier, and then perhaps we can move on. Carol?
Yes, I would agree. I'm not going to expand on my comment about the wording to make it consistent with what Javier was recommending. I think the appendix idea and expanding the concept and detailing it in the appendix would be great. Just a question about the other thing that's yellowed, the 24/7 staffing. Just a comment on that. Some of the other programs that we've looked at, their startup was not 24/7. They didn't have that capacity. It was a phased in moving up to 24/7. I think certainly Cahoots worked that way. So just the reality piece we have to keep in mind. That's all.
Thank you, Carol. Javier?
Yeah. Just to close this, because I do agree better to table it, and I agree with Booker and with mostly everything that everybody has said. What I meant by accountability is that people of color with lived experience are on the governance, oversight body, and leadership positions, right? We can say that without entering in how that has to look, but certainly we can be explicit how we see that. And also the fact that people should not just be consulted, but they should actually co-design the service, right? And even though those two phrases, Rachel Brumberg talk about this, these two things that I just said don't go into specificity, certainly are more specific about the spirit of where we want to go.
Okay, thank you, Javier. Namdi, and there's a comment from David in the chat. Namdi.
Yeah, just one quick addition that occurred to me, maybe somewhere around that line about the 24/7 staffing. I think we should probably say this agency will need to have a formal relationship with dispatch. We'll talk about this more later, but one thing we learned yesterday is that it's going to be crucial that dispatch is trained on how to interface with this agency. They'll need to be licensed in how to deal with this agency. There's a kind of whole formal thing that I think is worth putting in here, that there's a formal relationship with dispatch. So that's my point.
Thank you, Namdi. And I think Alex's hand is raised from prior. Javier, your hand's raised from prior as well. So we can, I believe, move on.
So I don't know, Alex or anyone, if they want to provide any context or say anything more about the phased approach to the changes.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly self-explanatory there. As far as the alternatives committee was concerned, we identified areas where we felt, okay, we have enough local testimony, we have enough information about how things work here, as well as doing the research of the other programs to confidently recommend a particular path. And so we put those in phase one. And I'm not sure, I know Booker submitted a whole section. I'm not sure if Carol has submitted the section, but that we should, I don't know if Dan and Cynthia, if you got that, but it would be great to get that, make sure everyone has that so that they could prepare comment before Friday's meeting. When we can't send our comment in, but if we can prepare comment, then and have that in written form if we desire, then that written form can go to the chairs so that over next weekend they can do further editing.
So just for clarification, so the names after these topics in phase one are more of a recommendation, what should be in phase one, as opposed to a list of recommendations, because the Resilience Hub is in process, as I understand. So Just want to make sure I have an understanding.
Well, Booker has written about and submitted, I believe. Did everyone get that?
I'm not sure I saw it. I didn't know. Dan shaking his head as well. I didn't see Carol's input. I haven't seen substance abuse.
Okay. Well, I believe we were supposed to send those directly to you too, but maybe that didn't happen.
Yeah, I sent mine through Noah, and so to be quick, I've got it copied, and I could load if you let me do it, but I could send it. But basically, a lot of what I wrote is from Resilience Hub and Housing First. There are actually documents within the Northampton City Council type stuff. And it's work that they've done and recommended, and I'm actually promoting what they've actually said. Obviously after the meeting we can do that, but we actually do. I agree with, as Alex has said, that this is phase one, not to be put off till next year kind of work.
So these are not recommendations. They're recommendations what should be in phase one.
Yes.
Just want to clarify that. Okay, so maybe we can move on, but we're going to need those documents, right, Dan? So we can get them in here. Yeah.
Tell you what, I will send each of you an email with my recommendations. But that doesn't have to happen right now.
Yeah. And Carol, did you send it to us, or is it in the floating around somewhere?
I thought I submitted it either to Noah or Booker, and I can't remember.
Okay, try to.
Yeah, let me see if I can dig it up.
Resubmitting everything to Noah would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll look for it right now.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not finished. I was waiting for more testimony, which has now arrived and we're going to work on. So I'll submit what I have.
Great. Perfect.
So we do have some stuff, and we're starting to go with the. So this is where retraining dispatch. We could change this to sort of like, I mean, retraining dispatch is kind of, but like involving or collaborating, increasing collaboration with dispatch. This section, but I know Booker, you had some comments about that relationship already as well.
So Dan, I just sent you my document. It's a first part of the document is what would go into what you just had, and then there's a longer set of things that are within a what would go into the appendices of why this is what we're recommending. Yeah, no, I was at the really wonderful initial part of the meeting with policies and hearing the presentation. And I feel before I talk about it, I ought to hear if Cynthia, I know, is going to meet with the person from dispatch to talk about things a little bit with more intricacy. She confirmed what we had already heard, that they're an independent agency, that they're sort of outside of the police, but they work carefully with the police. I think the things I heard that if I was them, I would agree with, they have a bias to being very careful about liability, and they carefully default towards involving the police in things that they're uncomfortable about or unsure about. Though a large number of the calls they do are, because it's what I do, I'll call it primary care calls. They talk a lot with people who just need to talk with somebody. What I couldn't figure out from the discussions is they also felt like people did not want to be referred to ServiceNet or the other mental health agencies in town that things are contracted with. And I couldn't discern why that was. And the other thing I heard was that they would welcome more agencies that they could refer to from the ones that they currently work with. They feel like they needed a bit larger menu of places to call. Before I go further with that, I mean, Cynthia, did you learn more in meeting with her?
Yeah, Booker and the full commission. Dan was with me as well, but I want to clarify when you said they're an independent agency, and that's what Kelly said as well, the director. But that term independent, she works directly for the mayor. And the interesting history is up until 3 or 4 years ago when the charter changed in the city, she worked for what was characterized as a civilian body of citizens from the community. And that was the oversight for dispatch. And then when the charter changed, she was moved under the mayor. So she's a department head, just like the chief of police or the chief of fire is. So that's how that works. Yeah, she said there's times when people say, I want a police, I want a cop. I don't want a mental health, and she named CSO because that's who the city has a contract with. And that can kind of go either way, I think, it dependent on the caller. And keeping in mind their go-to, because they don't have many other resources, is the police. And so that's who they're going to call first. But correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, she said, boy, wouldn't it be great if there was a social service person, a behavioral health person in the car with the police. And they appeared to be extremely open. Now, remember, their mindset isn't there yet, but they appeared to be extremely open to having other options and understanding of police presence and how it can be intimidating. Dan, did you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think they were, from their perspective, and they have. So it was really interesting to see the cards that they have, but they have an accrediting body that basically gives them the questions to ask and the responses to give. So ask this question based on the response. This is who to call or what to send or what to say or where to follow up. But they have all of those things very programmatically. It's done in these large sort of open binder cards so they can flip through them. And those are provided by the accrediting body as well. So the first sort of question is like, how does that translate to all the local different options? And what's there? I think they were really open to the co-responder, sort of police and clinician. And I think that is in part because they recognize, that you don't always need a police officer, but for them, you always have to respond and send someone. And I think that's really key for the dispatch perspective is somebody has to go, like that there has to be that action. There's not really a wait unless someone's calling like one of the business lines where it's just, I need information. So that's, for them, that's an interesting part.
Alex, then Michael. And I'm sorry, Booker, did you have any follow-up for that?
I'll wait for Alex and Michael.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
Thanks for that information and for meeting with them. I think one of the issues I remember from Chief Casper coming to talk with alternatives was how like the idea that it'll take time to build trust in a new system. And for example, Chief Casper seemed, when I asked about, okay, why do we see, you seem very focused on safety concerns and that you would want a co-responder in a very large percentage of responses. And, we see cahoots and others where that's needed in a much smaller case. So putting out the ideal of, many responses would not have a police response at all by default, but understanding also that it may take time to build trust in a new response, and that there could be a period of building that trust.
Michael?
I just wanted to make sure I understood everything that you just said, Cynthia, and Dan just said. So I actually have one question for each of you, which was, Cynthia, you had said that you thought that the dispatch chief was comfortable with adding responsibility. So if the decision tree around deciding who would call was a larger decision tree, they're comfortable with that?
I think I want to characterize it as that she thought that would be a great idea. Is she,
Okay.
she was really like, all the resources I can have, right? But she's got it. She's in a triage mindset of one lane there, right? And so I don't want to misrepresent, because she's used to like, okay, we'll send a car here, we'll send a car there. But I mean, there was no obstruction language or anything like that. But I think we put it. I mean, Dan asked a great question. If you had anything you wanted, unlimited funds in the world, what would this look like? And she's working in a, sort of a small shop with about four stations. And what we're talking about is something really quite expansive. And I don't know how she would react to all the things. But she did hang in there in our meeting last night for a long time, learning what we were talking about, and did some follow-up questions with us as well. So I don't want to misrepresent her. And Dan, help me out if I'm, accurately portraying this.
Yeah, I think you're on track with that. I think it was her question is really about what does she was really focused on training, like how long it takes, how hard it is to keep people once they realize what that role is as dispatch. And we watched them, even though some of the calls that they were on were just 30 seconds or a minute, because they were just really quickly transferring people, it takes an emotional toll. There were, there are calls of sensitive nature. We asked them what's the hardest call, and it's calls involving children, right, and their safety, and like taking emotional toll. But also that Northampton requires additional training. So the state requires, I should check my notes. Don't quote me on this, but it was 2 weeks of training, I think, and then
40 hours, and then all those other levels.
And then the Northampton has time where you're shadowing, doing the sort of some places in Massachusetts you just go right into dispatch afterwards. For them, it's doing extra training. There's trainings on communication, even it's doing things that are assertive, like assertiveness training. In that, so that there's all these other communication steps that go beyond. But I believe that she said they have about 50% attrition as people realize what that role is.
In training,
in how intense that can be. So just in terms of what they do, I think she would be looking at it, I think, in terms of what training is necessary, how is it going to be provided, and how is that going to fit in the existing model that they have, so that they can keep up that rapid response.
Right, and so that really helps a lot, both of you. Thank you. And then Dan, you were talking about an accrediting body. This is what you're talking about with state training. It's the state that certifies this. Just want to make sure I understood that.
Yes, so it's actually an international accreditation, but they have those processes in place so that if there were questions about who got sent where, and if there were problems with it, they can say that we are accredited. This is the process, and that body actually sends someone out to testify as well, to talk about, yes, they followed the process, they did the things they were supposed to do, they asked the right questions, and they did that response that's supposed to produce these optimal results. So that's what creates those binders.
And they would just be talking, and they were so happy to talk to us, and they would just be talking, and a call would come in where someone is seeing some kids possibly being abused, and they're just moving back and forth between that and a conversation. It was really quite amazing to watch. And Nick?
I just want to add a couple of things to, and I don't want to take too long on this. Michael, I heard in her presentation that there is a concern about liability if they don't send a police to a call.
Yes.
And they're fine with co-response, but she even said that people will be disciplined if they don't, if the person plays down the call, say, we didn't need to send a police on that one, that could result in a person being disciplined because they have to be extraordinarily cautious not to make assumptions about any call. So I just want to make that one point, and I think it's significant, by the way. The other, I want to respond to Alex's quoting Cahoots numbers. I think Cahoots numbers are a little bit, not a little bit misleading in that in Northampton, a large number of calls that would go to Cahoots are already being diverted by the crisis team. So I just want to say that Cahoots, some of what Cahoots is responding to, we have services in Northampton that are already responding to that. So I don't want to say that Cahoots doesn't have a lot to offer in that area, but the numbers are a little bit misleading, in my opinion.
Alex, is your hand up, or is that from before? Okay. So having, Chris was, okay, you were just, okay, Chris, I'm sorry, I thought your hand was up there for a second. Dan, do you want to move on, or did we cover dispatch enough? Or?
I mean, also we can move on. I'll spend some time trying to add in some stuff just from what we learned, this afternoon. I haven't had a chance to to digest and add in things too. But I also want to keep it relatively, sorry, my camera was off. I want to keep it relatively concise at this point, just to involve them. But also, again, without knowing what form this is going to take, the trainings that would be necessary would also, like, that relationship would have to be established from the city there.
Yep. Yeah. I think we can, yep.
So I want to put out an apology of if I butchered this. I was trying to figure out a way to keep different, like the different structures that everyone had in their different documents, without changing the text, but to put it into, what is the recommendation? And just focus on what we are recommending. So this is where it gets a little bit squidgy. It's going to need some formatting and things like that.
I'm just going to say, could you tell us what we're reading right now?
So this is the improvements to the current complaint process. And so this section details what would need to change to have a meaningful process for that review, how that would work. And so changes would include how, when, and where the complaint may be filed. So there's some language that, that's highly problematic, that complaints about the police go to the police and then are investigated by the police and decided by the police. Investigations of complaints shouldn't be done by the chief or co-workers of the officer against whom the complaint's been lodged. A decision on the merits of the complaint should not be left exclusively at the discretion of the chief. The merits and complaints currently are judged as either meritorious because of a finding of the violation of the law, or meritorious because of the finding of a violation of the NPD policy, or not meritorious. So those are the three options. And so recommending more categories of merit be added, and then sort of why. And we heard lots of complaints from people who said they didn't want to go to the police And then there's the penalty for transgressions of the police of MPD policy should not be left to the sole discretion of the police department or union. For example, the community might be empowered to require the assignment of an officer to a desk job who has lost public confidence as someone who can be entrusted to engage with the public in a respectful and non-threatening manner, even when the officer has not broken a law or MPD policy. So that's this section.
Booker, did you have a comment?
So my first, if nothing else I say gets heard, obviously the thing about the way Chief Casper heard the complaint shouldn't be anywhere close to being added to this document. Is there a suggestion that, I'm not part of this subcommittee process, is there a suggestion that a new department ought to be involved with adjudicating these issues?
Just one thing before we get too far in is that I also want to say these were what was sent on Sunday or maybe Monday morning. And so I know there's been a lot of rework too. So if the subcommittee wants to speak about these or what changes were made, I think that'd be great.
David? I'm sorry, I think Namdi was first. I apologize.
Namdi was first.
Namdi?
Yeah, sure. I just want to say that I was responsible for writing some of this text, and we have made revisions, particularly we have taken out the comment about Chief Casper being dismissive about customer service complaints. And if we knew that this was going to be used in this way, that I think certainly, I could take responsibility, or someone could render the spirit of this in simpler language. So, I mean, this is doing something that's a little different than what Dan was saying he wants, in the sense of it's not just making, it's not just making a recommendation for what should be done, but it's also trying to explain. This came out of the Policies and Services Subcommittee, and what we observed as deficient. We were trying to comment on what we found to be deficient, and I think we were less about how to fix it, although there were some notions about what should not be done. And in a way, I guess what we were trying to do was walk that tightrope about not stepping on the toes of alternatives. So that's why it has this. It kind of is more about the existing, what's wrong with the existing, than saying what should be fixing. How it should be fixing. So that's my comment. And I guess just the question that came up is, are we saying there should be a new department? I think the idea is that there should be independent, so that the complaint lands someplace outside of the police department. That's the most important thing. And that there's an independent kind of auditing option, so you can see what came in and see how it's handled and something like that. But kind of exactly who should do it is not exactly clear to me. So I guess that's my only comment.
David?
Yeah, I'll just say, I did the first draft of this. It was much shorter. I don't have a problem with the stuff that Namdi added, but the reason that I kept it really short is we had very little discussion about this. I think it was everybody's view that a citizen review board is not a solution to the problems of policing. Having said that, in my judgment, the way it's done in Northampton is just so patently unsatisfactory. And I just wrote a very short summary, probably a third about what's there, and then concluded it by, I think there's still a reference to the website there, that there's actually a whole organization that deals with this civilian oversight of law enforcement. It's NCOLE, National Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. So as I said, we spent very little time discussing this, and I don't think the commission should spend a lot of time discussing it, beyond noting that it's really inadequate the way it's done, but it's also not a solution to the problems of policing. So I really, in terms of where we spend our energy, I don't think it should be here.
Carol?
Just a question, again, not to get too far into the weeds in making recommendations, but I've been curious about whether there's a requirement for union representation whenever there's a complaint. Is that something that is fixed in granite, or? I mean, if you made some recommendation to take complaints to some external body with civilian oversight, does that run up against union requirements?
I think it would, but I don't know that for sure.
Mhm.
I can't see us making a recommendation to go around the union, but I don't
Yeah.
know. Nick?
I'm not suggesting
Yeah.
that. I was just curious about how it works now.
Yeah.
Can I,
Nick,
in my experience working in a union environment, if somebody is subject to an investigation where there might be disciplinary consequences, they're almost always entitled to union representation.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, I was trying to think that for the subcon or contracts and spending, the union contract does allow for representation. It doesn't necessarily say that it has to be, that they only represent within the police department, right? So that you could still have union representation if the disciplinary actions occurring somewhere else.
Sure.
I'm just wondering because this section has been edited heavily last night. I think the agreement is the complaint process is not a good process at all for a variety of reasons, and I'm wondering if we could maybe look at that revised language and then work on this as the recommendation for the complaint process to be different. Does that sound fair? And then we can move on. Okay.
And so this was, so again, there were responses that were, or sorry, the next part, again, is the responses that were primed for collaborative responses. And then there was another section that was, sorry, there was one that was collaborative responses and one that was this presumptive armed force response, which were the things that I guess would need police responses on this list. So I'm just going to start up at the top of this section for folks.
Dan, can I ask a question?
Yep.
Did all of this come from the policies committee?
These recommendations, yes.
Yes.
Specifically.
So I just want to explain how the policies committee went about this. We took all of the services and divided them into one of three categories: armed police response, cooperative or collaborative response, or unarmed civilian response. And we explained why each one fit into each category. So this is right here is the collaborative, the middle category of those three categories, in case anybody was wondering.
Boja, I'm looking at this and I think that I actually have the wrong language here. So this would be the non-police response / police alternative response. Okay, I read that wrong. So I apologize there.
I agree with what you just said, Dan, because unfortunately what we've heard from Chief Casper is if police are involved with the response, they will always be armed. And at the moment, an unarmed police response is not in our menu of options.
Carol?
Question again. Is well-being check a language that you heard at dispatch? I
think it's
I thought it was a wellness check, but maybe it doesn't
yeah.
matter.
They were using the term wellness check.
Were they? Okay.
David, I see your hand is up.
Yeah,
sorry. Thank you.
I wrote most of this, but Dan, I think you had, I don't think you, I think that you crossed off the proper title. These are areas where we think it could go either way, to put it in a most vernacular term. So for example, well-being checks, as I said, we feel that most of them should be responded to by, or no, wait a minute. Yeah, well-being checks, unarmed civilian.
Yeah, this one has it's the number 3 presumptive non-police response / police alternative response in that original document.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Great. All right. I'm sorry. I can't see the whole document, so I'm even though I wrote most of it, I don't remember it sufficiently well.
That's how I feel every day. Pandemic smooth brain. One thing that I did, I do know, and I don't recall if this was spoken about last night in the meeting. I had to leave about 15 minutes before 9, so I also missed some things. But this is also a language thing and a definitional thing, but there's a note of preferring behavioral health to mental health. And I think if we're going to include these, we should decide on sort of what we'd like to do. So I think that's a good discussion, or a good discussion to have too.
I think Nick has an opinion on that one. Nick?
This is a first draft that's in here. We rewrote this. The way we rewrote it was mental health and behavioral health related calls. We felt that people don't all know that behavioral health includes mental health, so we put both of them in there. We also explained what a Section 12 is, because we know that not everybody understands what that is. Most of it looks about the same.
So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit.
I'm being complimentary now, but I was quite impressed when the people from dispatch talked about how they also advise people how to go towards Section 35 services. That is really sophisticated. And by the way, I was so taken by the dispatch people in terms of their caring and warmth, and they were just marvelous. And it's like another reason why you want to live in Northampton, that these are the people who are participating in taking care of the community and how they want to think about things. So.
Just to follow up, that was, as we're sort of talking about this, that was one of the things that they really, they seem to take seriously and we're really sort of concerned about, is that they do have limited options, and like they used to have a whole set of who to call for what outside of, their the job that they have, so that if someone called not an emergency, but I'm worried about my child or a neighbor, things like that, that they had, again, that sort of like list of resources. And so I think the more resources you can give them and present to them, they can present those options out and give them to people too.
Yeah, she talked about trying to call other substance abuse treatment services and other things. It was really sophisticated what they were doing and hitting their dead ends. So anyway, I guess I'm speaking to is these people are just really trying to help people, and that's what's marvelous.
I just also want to point out that historically, the woman that spoke, she's been there 22 years.
Oh.
And she said when she first started, the police were not called on so many of the issues that they're being called on now. And so I said, what do you think changed? And she really couldn't answer that. She just said, she goes, maybe, what did she say, Dan, maybe 8 years ago or 9 years ago? It just flipped. And police were called on so many things that they never were called on before. And I don't know if it's the increase in mental behavioral health illnesses. Drugs, I'm not sure.
I mean, it could also be just what services were available too.
Yeah.
She brought this up as well for dispatch, because dispatch is also a 24-hour service. And if you don't have anyone to call, after hours support for offices like DPW, their 24-hour phone line is the dispatch. All of the schools have, if you call, the schools can call. So if there's an overnight janitor or something and something happens, when they call for help, it's dispatch. Even if they don't call 911 and they call the after-hours support for the school, it goes to dispatch. So, I think there was, just like the police, they got hit with that sort of you're the response, but also, 8 to 10 years ago was, our, the last recession. We think that did see a lot of different services sort of disappear. So I'm willing to bet that was also sort of part of that relationship is there's no one else, call the police for these things, but they started. There's an example that she gave for, if someone goes to the hospital for an emergency, but they don't have a vehicle, they used to provide ride vouchers so that someone could go home. Now they don't do that. And so people will call dispatch and say, hey, can you get the police here to bring me home?
And the police do. Yeah.
The police do that now. And, she said that before they weren't doing that. And that there was also a shift in sort of the customer service sort of orientation of the police department itself, and what calls it would accept or not.
So this is a difficult thing for me, is that I'm aware that the police are actually doing marvelous social work in the community. And I'm aware of individuals who are homeless, who are really being helped by the police, being fed by the police. So, and I think what we're hearing from these agencies is there are elements of our community who feel more comfortable talking to the police than talking to a mental health worker or other people. So it's a reality, and it's a part of what's going on in the policing. I can't work on that because my information sources are different. But I happen to know that it's going on. I think it's part of what's marvelous about living in the community, but there's also another experience where the police aren't doing things right for everybody. So, when we were living in Boston, Cambridge, and talking to people who worked at the Lifeline agencies, this is also what Lifeline people have to do. They're just getting called, but people are so lonely. They're the only people they're talking to. So, and that's what I was hearing from our dispatch people, that there's just, this individual calls every day, 3 or 4 times a day, and we talk. And so this isn't, it's part of being, it's the marvelous things about being in a community. But that doesn't dissuade us from the work I think we're doing here. But it's just sort of, I'm just saying out loud that I'm aware of that experience. And it doesn't guide me in terms of the work we need to do, but I actually understand that it's part of our community experience. So,
Nick?
I want to just pick up on what you just said, Booker, because there's been a lot of discussion and comment, and our committee, our subcommittee really struggled with this last night, how to communicate that our police department really has some very, very positive aspects to it. And yet our task is about the more about the act of policing than the actual conduct of our own police department. And figuring out how to communicate that in our recommendations, I think, is really important, because some of the feedback we're getting from the community is that people feel that the police are being targeted, we tried to put in our language, and that's why the policies committee report, we spent a lot of time wordsmithing it, so, and getting rid of some of the comments that you immediately noticed that that shouldn't be there, but trying to figure out a way to communicate that we can have a very, very good police department, and yet reducing police interaction has some benefits for everybody. So that just want to put that out there, because I think you really hit at a very, very important point.
If I could, I'm sorry, hands came up at the same time, so if you allow me to just call names, I may not have them in order, but Josie, Carol, Dan, and Namdi. Josie?
Yeah, sure thing. I kind of want to add on to what Nick is saying. Like, this is a very complex kind of narrative that we're weaving in between, right? The whole reallocation of funds is not done as a punitive measure to punish policing. And it's not to take away from any of our community members who have had positive experiences with the police. I, for one, think it's very beautiful that they've had positive experiences with the police. But the fact of the matter is that over the last few decades, police have taken on more and more responsibilities as social welfare programs and all these other really great programs have been stripped away. And so what's on the police's plate is so much. And we're not saying that they can't do all of those aspects well, or that they shouldn't be doing some of them at all, but like, we're trying to get some stuff off of their plate, not as a punitive measure, but as a way to empower our community. And though there are those people out there who have had positive experiences with the police, there are also people who have had negative responses with the police. And on top of that, there are people who like do not use the police at all and because there are no other social mechanisms for these people, they go unheard. And so it's not about taking funds away from the police to punish the police, but in fact to empower our communities by reallocating money away from the police to these social programs, getting some of the responsibilities off of the plates of police so they can focus and do the things that they do so well, even better, right? And have more people engage with these mechanisms that we want for our communities. Right? None of this is about punishing policing. There is an acknowledgement of white supremacy hierarchies here. But again, it is about empowering the people that those white supremacist hierarchies have gone and hurt for so long. And so I just want to that's my piece, basically.
Thank you, Josie. Carol, then Dan, then Namdi.
Well, Josie said it all. And I hope that there will be some language in this final report that says almost exactly that. I see the default to the police in the last 8, 10, 20 years, however long it's been, as defaulting not only broader public safety and security issues, but public health. And so I think somewhere in our report, we need to say, and I'm just wondering about that powerful testimony you got from the dispatch woman who's been there 20 some years. I think that's powerful testimony. I don't know whether you can reflect that in the report. Just somebody's observation who's been there has watched this trend. And, if we state it as a trend and nobody's fault, it just happened. I think some of it has occurred. It's fallen on the police because, among other things, and I don't know whether Nick would agree with this, but in the recontracting of crisis responses, the state has, and insurance companies and the state have really gone more technical in terms of what they want in the way of outcomes for the contract. And so there's been a lot of layers of change that have made the responses maybe not as holistic or compassionate. And I guess what we're recommending is let's re-envision, let's reinvent how some of these responses happen without blame, without really shooting at the police and saying, they're the enemy.
Dan?
Yeah, I'll keep this really quick. It's just to say that, while we were talking to dispatch, they also, so they talked about, sending police officers because people want them. They also talked about people who said, no, I don't want police. And they know from some of these repeat callers, if they send police officers, that person is going to be very agitated. They might be aggressive. They know that because that person doesn't want police. But they also don't have a lot of options, right? It's police or CSO in a lot of cases. And so I think the part about this, so to think about the framing, I really want to stick with, right up at the top here, which is that we want the right people available for all people. So the right response for all people. I think that maybe there's a better way to say it. I'll go back and rewatch Rachel's sort of language there. But really focusing on that, the police as a system, I've said this before, I'll say it for however many times, like the police as individuals can do great things. As an institution, it's become the default and the catch-all, and that is not going to provide the same responses in the way that I think we would like as a community. So I think it's just important to ground that at, and to ask, the sort of questions of like why is a police officer who's charged with law enforcement the way to get home from the hospital if you don't have a car? Like that sticks out to me as sort of like well, that's a nice thing, but there should really be unarmed response. That shouldn't be officer time. In those sort of ways. So I think just that part of it. That's all.
And just to remind folks, it's 7:33, but Namdi?
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm pleased to see that we have been discussing ways to acknowledge the positives of the Northampton Police Department in particular, and that we can kind of coexist, we can kind of agree upon the negatives of policing as an institution and the needs for reform, and all of those things can play nicely with, and the weaknesses of the Northampton Police Department. But I do think it's important that we are explicit in our final report about acknowledging the strengths. There should be a tone that of gratitude, for people who work all through the night to make sure the community is safe. They may not do so in the way that we think they should always, and if we find fault, we should criticize that fault. And if we think they're doing jobs that they shouldn't be asked to do, we should do that. But I do think it's important that we say it directly, and if we don't say it, I guess we should also be responsible for the fact that the effect might be that it might be received by the department as if we are criticizing that. So I guess I just want to highlight that. And so I'm so pleased to hear that there's a kind of consensus that there isn't a wish to criticize the Northampton Police Department. I hope we feel free to say that directly. I think they would appreciate hearing it, and that there's some sense of gratitude for what they do that we think is positive. That's all.
Michael, I just want to make sure, did you have your hand up or, okay. So
Namdi
I think
pretty much, Namdi said what I was going to say.
Okay, thank you. And Carol, your hand's down, right? Or did you want to say something again? Okay. Dan, how can we proceed here, knowing we have about 20 minutes left, or 25 minutes left?
Yeah, so I mean, in these, we can all look at this document. If you do have changes as a subcommittee, if you want to send them to me, and I'll sort of include them. But I think just being able to see some of these together, I think this is really helpful. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Dan, can I just clarify? We do have an updated version of this entire section. Can you just slip that in instead?
Yep. Yeah. So send that to me. I will. Or if you already did and I haven't seen it.
Already did.
All right. So if that came in this afternoon, I'll make the changes and get this out to folks. I think the next one, so these are the ones where there's the presumptive armed police response, and so it lists out again the justification for why police would go. I'm not sure if this belongs in like an appendix somewhere of like, and with a recognition of like, yeah, there are plenty of things that the police should, or that we expect them to continue to do, and then list out why in that appendix. But to keep this as like what we're recommending it's the question of what we recommend is changes to be made or improvements or identifying areas for improvement, or do we also include things that we don't want changed as part of a recommendation of like, we recommend you don't change this. I'm not sure how that goes, or what would make sense there. But so just thinking about some of these things structurally and how we want to write them. But these are the ones where there's the sort of the general recommendations here. And Booker.
Booker, sorry.
I'm really glad that the Policies Commission came up with this. Here's what we feel that police response still needs to be present for. And I think it's really clarifying. I think it belongs in appendix. I've got to say, as I was sitting thinking about sort of, I don't want to go further with this, but sort of drug arrests or things. If you decriminalize drugs, that's out of the scope of our committee. A lot of that goes away, and that's what's going on. Something I'm going to just highlight, so I hope we have time to come back to, is sort of what domestic violence response ought to be.
Yep.
And I think the Alternatives Committee is in a conundrum about that. So I'm just bringing that up as something I really like to have us come back to.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I do actually like the fact that we're acknowledging kind of what we expect presumptive police response to be included along with the other things in the report, because I think it's good for context setting. I think this is the kind of thing that has continued to come up in public comment around that we're suggesting these things kind of go away completely. And so I think it's good to not just have it as an appendix. But the other two things is I feel like, though, as much as we're including them into context setting, the response to felony property crimes and the possession of firearms, I think for those ones in particular, because those are ones that have resulted in shooting of unarmed people of color, I think it is important to include a value statement about why we are including those as ongoing role for the police department.
And just to, I just want to clarify the value statement. I'm not sure I have a good understanding of it, Elizabeth, just a little more on there.
Yeah, so I think the part of, so for example, with the property crimes, we're saying that, if something's in progress that we want, police to be, or is reported as in progress, we want it, armed police response. But I think there's something that around valuing people over property and human life over property needs to be, we understand this could be a dangerous situation, but the reason why there's an armed response is because it could be, the police officer could be in danger, other people could be in danger. Again, but it's not because something over $1,200 is worth the life of a human being. Even if this is property is being reported as being burglarized in progress. So I think that's the part that I feel if we're going to include this as something, and I agree, it's something that you do want an armed police response, but I think it's important to contextualize what we expect as a community in that response. Someone runs off again with something that's worth over $1,200. I don't think anyone in this community expects a human life to be, taken in order to retrieve property or to stop that property from being taken. And the same thing with the possession of firearms. There was something about if it appears that someone is suspected of carrying a weapon, something along those lines. There is a legal standard as to when you can search someone. It's about suspected progress of a crime. And again, this is a place where we see that the people who are often suspected of not legally carrying a weapon are often people of color. And so there needs to be, I feel like we obviously do want police response if someone's brandishing a weapon, but the suspicion that weapon is, that if someone is carrying a weapon, that it's illegally being carried, that is often colored by bias. So I just think we need to contextualize both of those pieces.
Yeah, thank you for that expansion. And I think Dan was simultaneously making some notes there in the margin to include some of that language. And Josie.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo some of the things Elizabeth just said. And something that I've heard a lot of at our public hearings is this idea that Northampton police are a cut above and, they haven't, we're not talking about Kenosha or, any of these other cities where there have been unarmed killings. But what I hear when I experience those statements is so do you want nothing to be done and we're just going to wait around until something does happen? Obviously, our commission's been tasked with looking at policing wholesale as a institutional structure, right? And though there are things that I am willing to admit that the Northampton police do well, there are also many, many things that they are and should be criticized for, such as the continuous treatment of not only POCs and LGBTQ people, but our houseless population. So that's just something I kind of wanted to throw out there, is that we're doing this in part so that those tragedies don't happen, right? I know that they haven't happened, but we're not just going to sit here and wait around until it does happen.
And Elizabeth, thanks for the thumbs up. Thank you, Josie. Your hand is still, I think, do you want to say anything else, Elizabeth? Okay, I think or do you? Okay.
No, thank you.
Okay. Booker was mentioning domestic violence and sexual assault, and I think that's the next item that's up, and it is a very, it's a tough one. So, if there's any reactions to that? And it's 7:44. Michael?
Thank you. I had a question for the top of phase 2 before we get into the specifics, but I do have a comment on domestic violence as well. And I wondered, there was a comment made in our hearing on Saturday from someone that said perhaps one of our recommendations should be to recommend the city conduct a needs assessment around emergency response and other things too. And I wondered if because phase 2 is something that these are items that are being recommended that they get more study before any sort of action would be taken, if we wanted to consider adding that in at the beginning of phase 2. Or, and again, I'm not necessarily wed to that. I just thought it was worth discussing as a group, if that was something we wanted to add into the recommendation. And then the one thing I would say, I was reading this line here, and I thought a lot about this because I've have some personal experience in history with domestic violence and the Northampton Police Department responding to a call that I was a witness of. And this sort of idea here about removing the person that's the source of violence was handled very well by the Northampton Police Department. And then, I think it's worth noting that, and it's mentioned here, and I think this is very accurate. So I just want to compliment this paragraph is what it comes down to, that very often people that are being abused, they don't want to lose their partner. They just want to stop being hurt. And so I would just wanted to compliment the paragraph and say that I appreciated it.
Thank you, Michael. If I could jump in too, and just because you brought up needs assessment, and Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot because of our parking lot conversation. Dan, you take it, and then Javier, and then we'll get into domestic violence. Yeah.
So I think, and I'm not sure where this goes, but I really do think that the city is going to need to do some real needs assessment to figure out what it actually needs. I think the chief is unclear on sort of exactly what, like, in terms of like holistically what they're doing by the numbers, because getting reports out is difficult. Dispatch as well. Kelly's been working really hard on our request to say, like, what do you do numerically, and really trying to get that data out. But I think even deeper than that is sort of that to really dig into the weeds of what that budget, what the budget is for the city, what the budget is for the police department, what they're actually doing, and doing that sort of time accounting. I really think they're going to need to have some form of consulting that has that expertise that's beyond what we do. And I'm happy to reach out to there are a number of different organizations and companies that do this. The one that comes to mind is DH Analytics, which helped with Austin, looking at the Austin budget. But they also they did more than just the budget, right? They looked at what the time is, what the officers are doing in there, what services are being provided, how much, like what the actual call volume is, just both frequency and time spent. And to really do that deep analysis and look at, multiple years, we've been trying, but it's beyond us. And I think that sort of evaluation is going to be critical in terms of scaling up. It does also mean that there's going to need to be some investment. Those usually aren't free. I mean, we can ask them if they do pro bono work. We're such a small city compared to the, million-person population stuff that they've done in the past. But to really get at that and to get that understanding, and to get all of the relationships that exist as well, because as we all know, Northampton has so many different nonprofits and organizations and centers that all sort of interconnect. But there's often not necessarily a policy in place or a contract in place. It's all of these sort of things that are implied, and they're taking all of that we don't have all that information. So I think that's going to be something. So yeah, that is on my brain, like burning a hole through my skull, really, like as I keep thinking about it and think about like what information is going to be needed beyond what we've requested and what we've got. So yeah, I would say that in phase 1 at the very bottom, I put or there was an evaluation of success. And so there's sort of this of like, evaluate the success of programs. I'd love to, and maybe this probably goes into an appendix, but to talk about what those evaluations should be, could be, but also put in there about like, part of this evaluation is maybe that it's a third-party entity with expertise in evaluating those things.
Javier, then Alex, then Carol.
Yep, I'm gonna voice that I really like how this section it's written, and also I like the idea of phase 2 in relationship to those topics and situations that we haven't either been able to discuss deeper, or we have tried, but we haven't been able to get service providers related to that come forward to talk to us, right? What I would like to see, though, so one of the groups that suffers domestic violence and sexual assault that is proactively not calling the police is undocumented folks. If that can be mentioned, that we heard from people in relation to domestic violence, sexual assault, and we heard people who want involvement, people who doesn't want involvement, right? But also there are those groups as undocumented people that the fear is not just getting the police involved, but it's getting the police involved because somebody in the family is going to end up being deported, because the family is going to be separated, because the children are going to end up in the system and separated from their parents. So I think that it's important to talk about that, having in mind that there is an undocumented population in Northampton.
Thank you, Javier. Alex?
Thank you for that, Javier. I was curious, so there is the appendix as well, which is much longer, although I don't believe it currently mentions undocumented folks. Just if you thought that if that specifically mentioned in this brief couple paragraphs, or if that can go in the appendix with more information. You don't have to weigh in now, but you can place a comment or something. But then I also wanted to speak to, I don't think that this phase 1, phase 2 idea was one that the other committees used. And so we have all these things that are put in phase 1 that may not belong there, or may not, remember that phase 1 is these are things we should try to implement in the next fiscal year, or move toward implementing. And so that's that. So just for those committees to perhaps think, do we want to do they want to put all the recommendations in terms of a phased approach, or should it be sort of moved out of this phase 1, phase 2?
So why don't we hold that question? It's a great question, Alex. And if we could finish up the topic with Carol and Elizabeth. Carol?
This is not on that topic. I'm going to have to leave abruptly for a couple of minutes, but I wanted to put out a question that needs to be considered, which has to do with the use of direct quotes from testimony that we actually things that we are now receiving through the outreach effort. And Javier is actively involved in copying and pasting them into documents so that we can, the outreach subcommittee can make a determination of which might be valuable to send to whatever subcommittee and be inserted in the final report. So here's a question that I think needs to be considered. How much are we going to use quotes? Because in this wonderful document we've been considering tonight, at least we haven't looked at what's going to go into the appendices, but in the body of the report, which is what we're looking at mostly tonight, there hasn't been use of direct quotations from our public comments and so forth. So I think I'm going to have to rush out for a minute, but I think either now or sometime soon we need to consider what the preferences are of subcommittees for the use of primary testimony.
Thank you, Carol. And don't forget about the meeting on Friday if you have to leave. So thank you.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
So we have Alex's phases. Should we do phases? Carol's question about quotes out there, and also want to make sure we get Elizabeth and Javier to speak and see what our next steps are. Elizabeth?
Thank you. Speaking to the phase 2 domestic violence sexual assault piece, one of the things that again, I like the tone of this paragraph. My only thought around it, though, is that we heard the chief testify that though things like the intervention project and victim support and all those things are great, that they're not universally available all the time, that they would require additional investment. I think that this is the type of thing we should talk about, where investment should be. I know I like the comment around additional study, but the idea around recommending for additional investment as well in terms of these survivor support aspects. And also, again, going back to the value statement, that, if that this not be considered, like mental health and these other pieces, we as a community value the work that the police department are doing in this area. And if we value it, then it needs to be something that's not a kind of a choice, whether or not, if you're a police officer, you can decide to opt out of, being trained and being, having a deep understanding of this area. You wouldn't have a police officer kind of opt out of, gun range training because they just don't feel like it. That's not their thing. If this is a violent crime, these are things that one of the top violent crimes that can happen to a person in Northampton, and so it shouldn't be optional. It shouldn't be whether or not someone is kind of interested in it. It should be a prerequisite to be a Northampton police officer. You will be someone who is going to be deeply ingrained in understanding the appropriate responses and working with the other community members and the other supports. This shouldn't be treated as a side issue. It's not. And so the type of investment in personnel and time and training needs to be required as part of the response.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's 8:56, and we've missed subcommittee reports. We have some things that we need to talk about, the phases and how we're going to put the quotes in, and also some of the domestic violence comment. What's the group's pleasure? Should we meet again on Friday and finish up this document with the new incorporations? Any thoughts? Is that, Dan, you raising your head? Oh, I'm sorry. Was there Javier and Alex? I think maybe Nick.
Yeah, so I'm all for going to Friday, but I just want to clarify something. So if anybody's interested, so I'm working on a spreadsheet with all the testimonies that had been added to the record in the minutes, right? And that's going to be ready to being sent to the outreach subcommittee, which is Dan, Carol, and myself, and Chris on Friday, and we're meeting on Sunday. And Sunday, we're going to be after everybody takes a look to it, we're going to be working in different themes for comments. And those big themes are going to be the ones who are going to make easier for Dan and Cynthia to be able to add those quotes and select those quotes throughout the document. If anybody from the full commission is interested to be part of that, please shoot me an email, and we're going to be meeting on Sunday. So just let me know.
Thank you, Javier, for the offer. So Alex, Dan, and Nick.
Yeah, I wanted to request, I don't know if it would be possible for the chairs to assemble a new version that's just simply, I don't know if that's legal. I'm just trying to think. So what I would love to have is the most up-to-date version that I could spend some time and have a couple days to essentially comment on, non-interactively, like on my own document, and then share that on Friday, but to have that time to really look through the most up-to-date version that I can. So I'm not sure what's possible with that, but that's just my request.
Thank you. Dan?
Yeah, so that's sort of getting to exactly that. So I just got a couple of emails of the drafts that folks had, so I'll be compiling them. I've got some writing that I've done on my own a little bit as well for some of these other sections, and then I've started to build out the appendices with what people have sent to. So my ultimate goal would be tomorrow afternoon, assuming that I get all of these things, that I can compile them. I don't want to make too many edits to them at this point. I just want to take what people have written so that we can sort of dig into them and then do some wordsmithing without it just having my voice. I write in a very different way. And I want to respect everyone's voices here and sort of what they're saying and find places for all of those things. So I will continue to hammer away at that. I've got the things from tonight, so I think it should be good, and I'll be able to sort of put them in. So I'll send that out so that we'll have that on Friday, and we can do some more of this sort of, what does this mean? Get into that sort of language of like lead versus guide, and what does lead mean? So again, for folks that have those, so if you want to send examples of models of advising and things like that, to send those along with the language that you'd like included as well. So I'll give like tomorrow evening by like, I don't even know, by 10 at night, because I know there's some folks that are going to be in a meeting as well. I know we're all meeting every night of this week. Anyway, just get them to me sort of before midnight. So I'll get that out at midnight or shortly after, making any of those additions so that we all have something to pick apart as well. Does that work for folks?
Thank you, Dan. Nick, I know you want to make a motion to adjourn. Is that what you want to do?
I actually was going to ask us if we could go for 5 more minutes. I want to respond to Alex and say that the update for the Policies Committee is the report that we submitted. We spent the entire time on the report. It still could be tweaked a little bit more, but it's mostly there, and it's been submitted to Dan. And Dan, you can check with Cynthia if you want to revise any piece of it for the final. And I just would like to hear a word from Budget and Alternatives.
So I just want to make sure I see Booker's hand up. And Alex, are you finished? Is your hand okay? So you want to hear from Budget and Alternatives. Booker, did you want to say something before we heard from Budget and Alternatives? Or did you want to, are you muted?
So the reason I asked that we yellow those statements that we were discussing 45 minutes ago, I'm not going to be diplomatic because I disagreed with them. So, and I wanted to revisit them, and I would like to be able to revisit them. I don't mind waiting until Friday to revisit them, and that's okay. But because to me, those were really important statements, and the music that goes along with the words in those statements was really important to me. That's my way of saying how you experience those things is important. And I don't mind waiting until Friday to go there. And I just want to highlight that as a thing of what we needed to do. The reason I brought the domestic violence thing is our subcommittee felt like we were in a difficult place about domestic violence. And it's an incredibly important issue, which has been already stated. We didn't feel like I didn't feel like I got enough information from the agencies we talked to have a clear voice about what we thought should occur. I felt like all we knew was it's an important issue. It's not being handled in a way that works for a lot of people. But we didn't hear paths to how that should be done. And that's why I opened that up. But we may not need to talk about that. And if everybody agrees it's a phase 2 issue, which is our way of saying we don't understand what we want to recommend, that's fine. And we don't need to discuss it anymore. otherwise, everything else that's been said, I'm just highlighting, I really want to focus on a couple of how we phrase some important words. Those words were happening in that early part of our document. And that I would like to just have an opportunity to return to that. That's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Booker, for reminding us of that. So we have three things: the yellow statement and the phasing question, and then the quotes. And then, is it possible we could have a just looking a quick update from spending? Josie, is that a possibility? Josie, or anyone on spending and contracts?
I can see that Josie unmuted.
Yeah.
But
Oh, there you are, Josie. We got you. Are you there? I think he's trying to readjust.
Hello?
Hello, Josie. You're just kind of faint.
Oh, okay. And I guess I can speak louder. All I was saying is the
That's
last
good.
committee was with the alternative subcommittee, where we really kind of talked about many of the potential funding and avenues for reallocating money to the new department. As it's been kind of stated in the past, we rely on the recommendations of this commission in order to kind of think fiscally about where to go from here. So we have a meeting on Thursday from 5:30 to 7:30 if anyone wants to come visit and watch that process go down.
Thank you, Josie. Thank you, Nick, for reminding us. And seeing no other hands, any motions to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Michael. Second from Javier. Noah.
Hi.
Hi. Like to call the roll?
Yeah. Booker,
Yes.
Dan,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Alex,
Yes.
Javier,
Yes.
Namdi,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Josie.
Yes.
Yes. Cynthia.
Yes.
I forget if Carol's still here or not. And Chris
Yes.
and Elizabeth.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Thank you. We'll see you on Friday, same time. Thank you all very, very much.
Thanks, everybody.
It's 5 o'clock Friday, right?
Oh, is it 5?
I think so.
Let me check.
Yes, I think it was so that we could meet and people could still have Friday evening.
Yeah, 5 to 7.
Okay, fair enough. 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Good match.
Just a fast plug. Any writing that people want to send me, I will happily take it. See everybody tomorrow, Thursday, or Friday.
Thank you all.